Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya Ali Madad, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Facets of Faith. Tonight's webinar is entitled Making Beautiful, Living by the Ethics of Our Faith, and will be presented by my friend, Alwaez Jamil Sawani. My name is Latif Noorani, and I'll be the facilitator for today's webinar, which will be just under an hour long. It'll be approximately 20 minutes of presentation from Alwaez Jamil, followed by a 30-minute conversation between the two of us. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few things. First, I would like to thank you for taking your time to be with us today, to explore, to be curious, and to be inspired. I'd also like to thank the volunteers and all the resources that have made this webinar possible, and a special thank you to Alwaez Jamil for sharing his time with us today. Alwaez Jamil is a familiar face to most of you, having seen him here on Facets of Faith and on Friday Night Reflections. But for those of you who don't know, Alwaez Jamil lives in Edmonton, where he practices civil and criminal law. He is a qualified mediator and serves as a member of the National Conciliation and Arbitration Board for Canada. And as an Alwaez, in his scholarship, Alwaez Jamil has a particular interest in the history and the evolution of our faith traditions and their practices. So, without further ado, here is Alwaez Jamil Sawani.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Latif, for that introduction, and good evening to you all. It has been narrated that our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was once seated with his friends and companions around him when, out of the middle of the desert, a lone traveler approached the Prophet and his entourage. There was something extraordinary about this traveler. He came from out of the middle of the desert, yet his clothes were pristine, without even a speck of dust on them. Now this sight must have been very strange for the Prophet's companions, but what happened next left them all even more perplexed. You see, the traveler began to quiz the Prophet by demanding that he answer certain questions that he was asking. The traveler first asked the Prophet, "What is Islam?" The Prophet obliged by telling the traveler that for one to have Islam, they had to comply with their religious obligations, such as prayer and zakat. The traveler proclaimed that the Prophet was correct, but then went on to ask him a further question and said, "What is Iman?" The Prophet promptly replied that Iman consisted of right belief, such as the belief in the oneness of Allah, His Tawheed, His guidance to mankind, His sustenance of the world, His justice, that will all ultimately be held accountable for our deeds. And once again, the traveler proclaimed that the Prophet was correct. And he went on to ask a further question. He asked, "What is Ahsan?" The Prophet replied to the traveler that those with Ihsan served and worshipped Allah as though they could see His presence. And even if they could not see Him, they know that Allah is present and sees them. For these people, their thoughts and actions reflected their intimate and permanent relationship with Allah. What is this third question that was posed to the Prophet? What is this principle of Ihsan? I know this may be a term that we're not too familiar with, and it's possible that even the companions of the Prophet were not familiar with the importance of this concept before the traveler had arrived amongst them. But this concept is central to the way in which our faith and our Imam asks us to live in this world. And that is why tonight we will explore how Ihsan is a spiritual discipline that calls on us to engage with others and the world around us. We will discuss how our Imam calls on us to practice Ihsan in our daily lives by calling us to live within the ethics of Islam. And lastly, we will discuss how the concept of ihsan provides us with a tool to decipher that often asked question of what are the ethics of Islam and what actually makes them Islamic. Now, the traveler in our story, after asking his questions from the Prophet and verifying the answers, simply stood up and left by walking off into the desert the exact same way that he had come. And it was only after he had left that the Prophet told his confused companions that the traveler was in fact Hazrat Jibreel alayhi salam, the archangel, whose visit was a vehicle through which the Prophet was able to explain to his companions that their spiritual progress did not simply stop at religious practices or at proper beliefs, but in its highest form required that our every thought and action be in harmony with our relationship with Allah. This way of being is captured by the term ihsan. Now, scholars have struggled to translate this word, sometimes translating it as excellence or virtue. But the word ihsan itself comes from the root husn, which is the word for beauty in Arabic. And ihsan literally means to act beautifully or to manifest beauty in the world. And this act of manifesting beauty, ihsan, is the next step on this ladder of spiritual progression. And this should be nothing new to us. We all understand that there are varying degrees of spirituality. In Ayah 14 of Surah Al-Hujurat of the Quran al-Sharif, we hear the Prophet being spoken to, and he is told, قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. The Arabs say that we have Iman. Tell them not to say that they have Iman, but rather they have Islam, have submitted, because Iman has not yet entered their hearts. As Muslims, we all, inshallah, have submitted to Islam. And further, it's our prayer that we have sincere belief and therefore have Iman and can be counted as mu'mineen, believing in Allah and His guidance through the prophets and the Imams, to our present day Imam, Maulana Shah Karim al-Husseini. But the Prophet's exchange with Hazrat Jibreel tells us that this is not the end of the road, and that there are further steps on the ladder bringing us closer and closer to our Lord, and in greater harmony with Allah. To achieve this harmony, we must seek to practice ihsan and become the muhsineen, whose closeness to Allah is spoken of in the Quran. Allah says in the Quran that He is with those who have ihsan. And He says, Allah yuhibbul muhsineen. Allah loves those with ihsan. And just as the Prophet guided his companions and followers on how to have ihsan and live a life in harmony with Allah, so our Hazar Imam guides us to ihsan, although his language is more contemporary, and he speaks to the realities of the day. And this is one of the blessings that we have in terms of having the guidance of a Hazar Imam, who we acknowledge as the Sahib al-Zamani wal-Asr, the Lord of the age and time. Hazar Imam teaches us how to achieve ihsan in this age and in accordance with our current times. And one way in which he does this is by continually guiding us to act in accordance with the ethics of our faith. In an Irshad Mubarak given to the Tajikistan Jamaat in 1998, Hazar Imam asked us to be guided by the ethics of Islam and to intertwine them with all of the actions of our everyday life. Now, for many years, I had always struggled with the relationship exactly between ethics and our faith. How does acting ethically in the world help me spiritually progress? And what makes an ethic Islamic? But over the years, I've seen that Hazar Imam has explained this relationship through his public speeches. In 2007, in a speech to a graduating class at Institut d'études politiques de Paris, Hazar Imam explained that the ethics of Islam bridge the realms of faith on the one hand and practical life on the other, what we call deen and dunya. Also here in Canada, while delivering the La Fontaine Baldwin Symposium lecture in 2010, we can hear Hazrat Imam speak of this relationship.
What we must seek and share is what I have called a cosmopolitan ethic, a readiness to accept the complexity of human society. It is an ethic which balances rights and duties. It is an ethic for all peoples. It will not surprise you to have me say that such an ethic can grow with enormous power out of the spiritual dimensions of our lives. In acknowledging the immensity of the divine, we will also come to acknowledge our human limitations, the incomplete nature of human understanding. In that light, the amazing diversity of creation itself can be seen as a great gift to us, not a cause for anxiety, but a source of delight. Even the diversity of our religious interpretations can be greeted as something to share with one another, rather than something to fear. In this spirit of humility and hospitality, the stranger will be welcomed and respected, rather than subdued or ignored.
Hazrat Imam stated that an ethical disposition can grow with enormous power out of the spiritual dimensions of our lives. And just as Ihsan is a framework that arises as we progress spiritually, in another speech, Hazrat Imam calls us to a deepening sense of spiritual commitment and the ethical framework that goes with it. And in Hazrat Imam's speech during the foundation ceremony for the Ismaili Center in Dubai in 2003, we can hear him speak of the opposite also being true.
Like its functions, the center's architecture will reflect our perception of daily life, whose rhythm weaves the body and the soul, man and nature, into a seamless unity. Guided by the ethic of whatever we do, see, and hear, and the quality of our social interactions, resonate on our faith and bear on our spiritual lives, the center will seek to create, inshallah, a sense of equilibrium, stability, and tranquility. This sense of balance and serenity will find its continuum in the wealth of colors and scents in the adjacent Islamic garden which the Arkan Trust for Culture will help to develop as a public park. Through its design and functions, this center, like its predecessors, will reflect a mood of humility, forward outlook, friendship, and dialogue. Above all, this center is being conceived in the ethic of respect for human dignity. It will therefore aim to empathize with and to expand our intellectual, cultural, and moral horizons.
We heard Hazrat Imam in the speech saying, the ethic of whatever we do, see, and hear, and the quality of our social interactions resonate on our faith and bear on our spiritual lives. So now we have so far discussed the concept of Ihsan and how we should all strive to achieve it. And we have also discussed how Hazrat Imam guides us to Ihsan by asking us to live within the ethics of our faith. That still leaves the question of what makes our ethics Islamic, and how is acting ethically an extension of our faith. And once again, Hazrat Imam has beautifully explained where the Islamic concept of ethics come from. You see, these ethics are not some arbitrary list that we need to memorize. When explaining the concept of an ethic of sustainable building and conservation to the American Institute of Architects in Chicago in 1994, Hazrat Imam said, "Indeed, it is my very faith Islam which articulates that concept. God has entrusted His world to the living in order that we may improve it from one generation to the next. This is the ethic which must govern our actions in relation to the physical world around us. Thus, our spiritual, cultural, and institutional capacity, as well as the earth's physical and natural resources, become our legacy a legacy which we must pass on to future generations. Here, Hazrat Imam derives ethics that seem new age and millennial, like sustainability and environmentalism, from our fundamental beliefs about Allah and our relationship with Him. And so before the preeminent architects and city planners in the world, Hazrat Imam actually spoke about the trust, the amana that Allah has placed in us. The trust that we remind of ourselves of in the oft-repeated verses of the Quran, wherein we say, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la takhuna allaha wa rasulu wa takhunu amanatikum wa antum ta'alamun. O you people of Iman, do not betray Allah, His Messenger, or His trusts, amanatikum, while you know it. This verse invites the believer, the mu'min, to act with ihsan in accordance with the relationship of trust with Allah and His guide. And this is ultimately where the rubber hits the road. Acting in accordance with the ethics of our faith is how we live our beliefs, so they infuse our whole life. So if we as Muslims believe that God created us from one soul, what ihsan requires is that we live our life in accordance with that grand reality. In a lecture given at Harvard University in 2016, we can hear Hazrat Imam explain this very principle.
Finally, I would emphasize that a cosmopolitan ethic is one that resonates with the world's great ethical and religious traditions. A passage from the Holy Quran that has been central to my life is addressed to the whole of humanity. It says, O mankind, fear your Lord, who created you of a single soul, and from it created its mate, and from the pair of them scattered abroad many men and women. At the very heart of the Islamic faith is a conviction that we are all born, quote, of a single soul. We are spread abroad, to be sure, in all our diversity, but we share in the most profound sense a common humanity. This outlook has been central to the history of Islam. For many hundreds of years, the greatest Islamic societies were decidedly pluralistic, drawing strength from people of many religions and cultural backgrounds. My own ancestors, the Fatimid Caliphs, founded the city of Cairo and the great Al-Azhar University 1,000 years ago in that city, in the same spirit.
In this way, all of the ethics of Islam that we contemplate can be traced back to our relationship to Allah. As explained by Hazrat Imam, the fact that Allah created us from a single soul gives rise to the Islamic ethics of pluralism and of a common humanity. The fact that Allah has created each one of us as His highest creation and has breathed His own spirit into each one of us requires us to recognize the dignity of all human beings and care for the well-being and quality of life of all humankind, within our Jamaat and beyond. The fact that we have been created should also give rise to the ethic of humility, because as Hazrat Imam has said, recognizing our own creaturehood means recognizing our own human limitations. Through Hazrat Imam's guidance, through his speeches, he is showing us how to relate each and every one of our actions to our deen, to our faith. He is asking us to remember Allah and the guidance of His prophets and the Imams in everything we do. So when faced with a decision, to ask ourselves, how can we act in a manner that upholds and does not betray our relationship with Allah and creation, or our bayat and allegiance to the Imam? And this is not an easy task. Ihsan means that we take our faith and beliefs seriously. It is far too easy to get caught up in the worldly pursuits that we may have, whether they be advancing in our career, saving up for our dream car or a dream house, or just keeping up with the Joneses, or in today's day and age with the Kardashians. And we don't always tie our pursuits to our relationship with our Creator and our common humanity. And we tend to forget the most real relationship of all we have in order to focus on things that are fleeting, that are here today and gone tomorrow. But the opposite of forgetting is remembering. And the word for remembrance in Arabic is dhikr. And our Imam, knowing that we are sometimes forgetful, has recommended and asked us to practice dhikr throughout the day. Whenever we have a spare moment, to take out our tasbihs and do dhikr. In addition to the barakah we receive from such dhikr, we are reminded by doing it of our relationship with Allah throughout the day, so that we can take measure of our actions and ensure that we are in fact in harmony with our true nature. Our effort to achieve ihsan is a spiritual commitment that is in many ways very complementary to the practices of prayer and spiritual search that we engage in. While we seek a recognition of divine light within us through our ibadah, through ihsan we try to actually witness and have a glimpse of the divine light of Allah and His attributes in the external world by making them come to life through our own actions. While we seek the internal spiritual vision of Ya Rahman or Ya Kareem through our prayers, through ihsan we witness the beneficence and the kindness that is ultimately from Allah through our very own ethical conduct. And such action is a way in which we can actually see Allah, just as the Prophet related in his answer to Hazrat Jibreel. Ultimately, acting in accordance with the ethics of our faith is a key to our spiritual progression, from being Muslimin to Mu'mineen to the Muhsineen, who in their every thought and action reflect and are in harmony with their relationship with Allah. And this is why our Imam places such stress and importance upon living the ethics of our faith. Hazrat Imam guides us on the path to ihsan by teaching us and exemplifying the ethics of our faith, which are deeply tied and in fact emerge from the spiritual relationship that we have with our Creator and with each other. Inshallah, this understanding can help us practically in our daily lives. So when we are faced with a tough decision or an ethical dilemma, we can turn instead to the source of our ethics for potential answers by reflecting upon our spiritual relationship with Allah, with the Imam, and with our brothers and sisters in creation. And this framework can be applied in our everyday lives, in answering questions ranging from how we should spend our time, how we should spend our money, what products we should buy, whether we should use paper or plastic, how we care for other people in distress, and how we treat guests or even strangers amongst us. And throughout the day, we can use tasbihs and remember and reflect upon our relationship with our Creator until, inshallah, we can achieve ihsan and see the divine in everything and everywhere. Ameen. I hope this talk has given a little bit more information on this very interesting topic of ihsan, and I would love to begin to engage in a discussion with Latif, with you, to see what your thoughts are on this topic and how we may engage in this practice, both personally as well as a Jamaat.
Thank you, Alwaez. Wow. I mean, you've taken us on this ethical journey that is infused with spirituality. It's such a different and, I think, powerful take on ethics. And I really want to explore these esoteric aspects of ethics and the link between ethics and prayer that you made. But before we get to those more subtle things, I thought we could start with some practical questions that you could help us with and help our viewers with. And maybe we would start with a question. Imagine a murid comes to you, Alwaez, and says, Alwaez, I try to be a good person. I say my prayers regularly and I fulfill my religious obligations. I avoid undesirable social habits. I don't lie. I don't steal. Try to respect everybody and try to be kind. Try to serve whenever there's an opportunity. I give a little bit of my wealth from charity. Isn't that enough? Do I need to do any more, Alwaez?
Well, that's first and foremost. I would say, mashallah. That's wonderful to hear that someone is so engaged and thoughtful about their life in terms of how they're spending their time and things of that nature. It's I would also say that such an individual is already on the path of ihsan in that type of way. And part of it is just acknowledging that many of the underlying or underpinning reasons why we have such desires to help other people or to even pray at the end of the day is also a part of this relationship of ihsan, in which we see and try to realize and actualize the right relationship between us and God and us and creation. So since we have been created by God, then by Allah, then of course we have a sense of gratitude. And that is where our prayer and our ibadah comes from. So even acting in terms of saying our prayers or giving thanks to God is a part of that expression of ihsan. When it comes to the worldly aspect of that particular practice, however, it does cause us to continually ask ourselves, are we in harmony with our Creator? And there's a wonderful quote from Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah alayhi salam, in which he speaks about the ultimate question that a man must ask, or a human being must ask themselves at the end of the day, and that is whether or not they are in harmony with their Creator. That being the ultimate question, beyond whether we have checked off any boxes or any criteria in terms of what we think a good person should be doing. At the end of the day, when we sit down and reflect, are we actually acting in harmony with that relationship? And part of that is our relationship to one another. And it's wonderful that this murid, that this individual comes and says that he is, giving charity, he's helping other people. And part of that, of course, comes from that desire to help other people. And where does that come from? In Islam, we see it comes from that idea of common humanity. It comes from that idea of recognizing the dignity of another person. Because of the exalted status of another person, of all humanity, you want to ensure that they have the ability to nourish whatever spark it is in their life and make something of themselves and gain happiness in this life. That's something that is not only an individual responsibility, but it's a communal, a global responsibility, a common responsibility for all humanity to look to the welfare of every other individual. So I would say, mashallah, alhamdulillah, keep on doing what you're doing, but also work on creating those linkages in terms of seeing how this is an extension and seeing where that takes you in terms of other things you may feel may allow you to create that sense of harmony and extend it throughout your whole life.
Thank you, Alwaez. But on that note, you talked about big concepts like sustainability, right? And you could even expand on that to ideas of social justice. The Imam talks about pluralism. These are big ideas, and it's hard sometimes for individuals to think about how to take these big ethical ideas and implement them in their own lives. It's one thing to be kind to the person next to you or to take care of your family, respect your elders. It seems like another thing to be engaged in sustainability or care for all of creation. That just seems like something that's too big for a simple person to take on.
I am a strong believer that there's nothing too big for an individual, one person to take on. But that being said, there are often certain adages such as think global, act local. Of course, there's a sphere of influence that everyone has. And oftentimes it comes down to even the little things. You spoke about social justice. It's very interesting how we have a sense of justice within our core fundamental beliefs of our faith, that ultimately God is just, that he likes to see justice, and justice will ultimately prevail, and this idea that there will be a reckoning in terms of everyone's actions. But that being said, that's not only a horizon type of ideal, right? What Ahsan requires of us is to try to see and establish such justice in our own lives. And it starts within our own homes sometimes. Are we being just with our own family members? Are we being equal with our time amongst our friends and our family? Are we, in fact, being just in terms of the responsibilities within our own households? I know sometimes it's difficult to take a look at ourselves, just even within the family unit. Is there justice within the family unit? And then we expand it. Do we see justice in our community? Are there those who do not see the benefit of or equity within their pay, within the way in which they're treated by society? And are we that voice sometimes that speaks up to try to establish that justice or see that justice is done in the spheres that we even have influence within? Sometimes it's all too easy to turn a blind eye. And what Ahsan requires of us is to never turn that blind eye, because it's a question of whether or not we are in harmony with our Creator and with His creation. So it's not a matter of taking on the world, but it is a matter of ensuring that we are more introspective and look at our own lives and seeing how we can bring about those attributes of love, of justice, of kindness, of mercy, of dignity that we see in terms of the attributes of God, and bringing them into our lives in the people amongst us.
I love that. And it's also inspirational in the sense, to me at least, when you talk like that, it feels like that Ihsan is not just creating an obligation on me to speak up when I see something or take action when there's an opportunity around me within this sphere of influence you described, but it also seems like also the source from which I can gain the strength to do it, because it is a hard thing to step up and to speak up when we see things in our community or in our own house, and to find that strength through Ihsan, through our harmony with the divine. Seems to be not just the impetus to do it, but also the source of strength to do it as well. And I really like that. I want to change directions a little bit to another question that I hear particularly from young Marids, and that you talked about a little bit in your remarks, which is why we need religion to be ethical. I mean, I understand that, as you described it, ethics are a necessary result of having Ihsan. That is, in order to, that ethics are a necessary part of our religion. But is the opposite also true? That is, can you have ethics without religion?
Now, that's a very, very complex question. And there have been ethicists and that have written books, and philosophers who have spent lifetimes trying to decipher that particular question. And ultimately, I'm not trying to say that an individual who does not have religion or does not have faith cannot act in an ethical manner or cannot have moral understandings. The ultimate question is, what is the source of the ethics upon which you act? What is the framework? And there are many different frameworks that people can work from. There, even within philosophy, within ethical thinking, there are ideas of utilitarianism. There are ideas of distributive justice, things of that nature that we might be getting into things that are a lot more philosophical, but ultimately can lead to ethical dispositions and ways of thinking that would be completely contrary or antithetical to what Islam teaches. For example, there is a strong trend within the Western mindset of this idea of liberty, for example, and personal freedom, which is a strong, has an ethical basis within Islam as well, the idea of the dignity of the person, the ability of them to make their own choices. But at the same time, focusing on the benefit to an individual at the expense of the family or the community or the environment in which we live would be antithetical to the broader framework of ethics within Islam, in which we have to look at our relationship to our Creator and how that creates obligations as well as relationships with all of humanity. And this idea of ultimate liberty being the guiding factor in which makes something ethical or not, or personal benefit being the penultimate or the most supreme value. The question is, where do you get your hierarchy or your framework of values? And Islam provides a very sound and solid foundation for the creation of ethical ideas and ethical actions that flow from them. And in the absence of such a fully formed framework and view and view of the world and creation, it becomes very easy to become untethered. It becomes easy to look at whether actions and look at them in a scheme of maybe statistics and saying, well, let's even if one or two people suffer in this case, the majority of people will do better, and that's why we'll take that action. The Islamic framework would require us to look at the one or two people who will suffer as well as being those people worthy of dignity, and it would require a different type of ethical analysis. And everyone has to engage in this exercise themselves. Ultimately, the question is, are you in harmony with your Creator? And that guiding question is something that helps in terms of formulating ethical action. In the absence of some overwhelming framework, however, it becomes very easy to become untethered and unmoored. And that's why a faith-based ethical system is one to be prized and cherished. Not to say that other faiths don't provide ethical frameworks, but this is something that we should be highly proud of and engage with wholeheartedly.
But it doesn't, which is wonderful, thank you. And I really love the way you've helped explain that. But I think it seems to me, as you described it, that there seems to be a lot of overlap as well in these. I mean, it seems to go to a question of value systems. And it seems to me that while the Islamic value system and the Islamic approach to ethics is distinct from, in our context, the Canadian value system, there's also a tremendous amount of overlap. And so it's something that we can be proud of and we can integrate into the society in which we live in, but not necessarily accept all of it. And I think the example you gave of this focus on individual liberty is not something we have to wholeheartedly adopt, but still something that we can respect and is still part of the Islamic value system, but in a more measured way. And so maybe you could talk a little bit more then about where that overlap occurs and where we can bring something to the Canadian society in which we live.
Most definitely, yeah. And in Canada, we are very fortunate that Canadian values are almost in many ways synonymous with the values of Islam, the historical values of Islam, and the values of our community, the ideas of multiculturalism and pluralism, the ideas of a strong voluntary ethic that is both shared amongst the Deen of Islam as well as the Canadian society, and many other ideals, such as ideals of justice and things of that nature, really do resonate quite strongly. And what we can do is in fact strengthen those common values and also bring to the table some more of the ideas that may be a little bit more unique to our own faith and cultural tradition, and make the tapestry of Canadian values that much more richer. Such ideas in terms of the concepts of humility, of course, as I had already stated, some of the very well developed ideas, in fact, of environmental stewardship and things of that nature, which although are part of the Canadian value and ethics system, those are things that really, if we dig deep within our own treasure trove of ethics, ethical frameworks, we can bring to bear, I think, new ideas and new ways in which we can make Canada ever more richer by adding our voice to the table in terms of these very complex as well as very necessary issues to tackle in terms of what the world is facing today.
It's a great opportunity for us, but a tall order. I hope we can achieve that, Alwaez. Thank you. I want to change directions again a little bit and shift more towards some of the spiritual ideas that you talked about. And I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about the concept of taqwa. You quoted Maulana Hazrat Imam, who was referring to that verse of Surah An-Nisa, O mankind, fear your Lord, who created. That's, my understanding, is a reference to the concept of taqwa, of the fear of Allah, but also I've heard it translated as consciousness of Allah or God consciousness. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the concept of taqwa relates to the idea of ethics and to ihsan.
So God consciousness, as you said, taqwa. Taqwa has been translated as you have stated in many different ways. It's this idea of being conscious of the presence and the overwhelming, awe-inspiring power and majesty of Allah and what His role is in our lives. And of course, with respect to God, the Almighty, the Divine, one of our reactions in the face of that is this idea of awe, of fear, not in a negative way, in a sense, more so of a sense of being overwhelmed in the presence of such magnitude. And that's why fear is sometimes translated in that regard, and we shouldn't be afraid of that term. It is a part of the cluster of ideas that surround the word taqwa. On the other hand, the word that you stated, God consciousness, this idea of always being aware of the presence and the role of the divine in everything that we do, is very tightly linked to this idea of ihsan, whereas ihsan is the active force. Taqwa is a recognition, of course, but ihsan is it's like the ocean rushing in to fill a crevice. Ultimately, when an individual sees that someone is being hurt or harmed or is in pain, what we see there is an opportunity to create mercy, to create kindness, an opportunity to ensure justice is done. So it's that idea of being conscious of the attributes of God that we love and we desire to see, and making sure that anytime we see a void in terms of those attributes, to rush in to fill them ourselves. It's our own way of ensuring that God consciousness that we would like to be aware of or see at all times. In fact, when we see something that is contrary to that ideal, we in fact fix it. We are that active agent that then makes it so that even in that situation, at the end of the day, we see God in everything. They're highly related concepts. In the one sense, it's a disposition in terms of taqwa is always being conscious of God, and ihsan is the act of bringing that consciousness to fruit or to bear in the world.
Or as you said, manifesting beauty.
Yes.
Bringing that beauty and godliness into the world.
There is a hadith Qudsi, which is has been related according to our tradition by the Prophet that God is beauty, God is beautiful and He loves beauty, and in that sense, when we create anything that manifests some of those characters that we love of the divine, such as justice, kindness, mercy, we are creating beauty through those actions and thereby manifesting the divine within the world.
You spoke about seeing God everywhere, right? And when you connected this concept of ihsan and taqwa, and maybe that's where we can finish our conversation. Because I understand the concept in my head that God is around us. Everywhere we look, there you see the face of God, that we should live our life and pray as though we see God, for even if we don't see Him, surely He sees us. You can say all these words, but living it and knowing it in your heart, it seems to be a different thing. And what would you say to someone who is trying very hard to manifest beauty, to have ihsan, but can't reach that state of having that constant awareness and having that awareness flow through you, like you said, as water filling crevices? It's something that I think so many of us aspire to, but seems such a far away idea on the horizon that can't be reached. And what advice would you have to someone who says, I understand this, but I want to experience it, and how do I get from where I am today to where you're describing?
So first and foremost, I would say to such an individual that the act of in fact seeking and trying to gain such an appreciation of Allah and seeing Him everywhere is in fact a blessing, and should serve as a sense of hope, as well as a sense of joy in their life, inshallah. That being said, any true glimpse or vision of the divine in our own lives can only come from the grace of the divine Himself. And accordingly, what we can focus on within that tradition itself that you quoted, that we seek to worship or serve Allah as though we could see Him. And even though we may not see Him, we know that He sees us. There's two parts to that. There's the first part of worshiping Him or serving Him as though we see Him, of course. And of course, we would all love to be at that level. But there's this second level as well. There is a a grace given in the sense that even if we do not experience that direct vision in terms of our actions, we can also achieve ihsan and achieve the benefits of it by knowing that God sees us. And that is related once again to this idea of taqwa. It's this idea of God consciousness. And it's this idea of always seeking to recognize God in the world around us, and even in the actions that we do ourselves. So, for example, when we see and take a walk in nature or go to a garden and we see a beautiful flower, smell its fragrance, we see a mountainscape, we smell the crisp morning air. All of those experiences carry within them a certain degree of beauty. And part of taqwa and ihsan is recognizing the beauty within those mundane actions. The actions of, in fact, cleaning and tidying up your own house so that it's put in order. The actions of spending some time with your loved ones so that you give them comfort and your own rahmah. In each one of those actions, if we recognize that the benefit that is within them ultimately comes from God, it is as though although we may not see God, we know that He sees us. We know that He sees us because we experience the warmth, we experience the beauty, and He is the ultimate source. So it's partly a mindset in that case. And if we practice that mindset, ultimately, inshallah, we may be granted with that divine glimpse of being able to worship Allah as though we saw Him. But in the absence of that grace, we have the second part of that tradition that gives us grace as well through the mere action of recognizing the beauty that is in the world and that we can create within it.
Thank you again, Alwaez Jamil, for sharing your thoughts and insights with us. And thank you all for taking your time to be with us today. We would love to hear your feedback on tonight's webinar. So please go to this link on your screen, or if you're in the YouTube app, you can click on the link below, which will take you to the II Canada website, where you can click the link for feedback. We would love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on what you heard tonight and what you would like to hear in the future. And finally, a reminder to everyone that the access line is available to give you resources, information, or assistance of any type. The number is 1-888-536-3599. You can also visit the iicanada.org website for further information on how to contact the access line. Thank you all. Ya Ali Madad and Khuda Hafiz.